Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar.
Good evening. Sunday night on the Call to Freedom on LRN.FM. This is Will Coley, and as always, I am joined by my amazing co-host, Mr. Davi Barker. I know he's somewhere out there.
Hey,
There he is. There he is. What's up, Davi? How you doing tonight?
how's it going? I'm good.
Oh, it's another day in the life. Can't complain. You know how it is. So,
Merry camouflage to everyone within the sound of my voice.
So yeah. Speaking of the alternate holiday that you've decided to celebrate today,
No, it wasn't me. No. This was founded in 1879 when Valentine's Day was abolished and replaced with the Emperor's birthday. And all true Americans celebrate the Emperor's birthday.
well, which emperor would that be? Would that be Emperor Obama?
The Emperor of America. No, Emperor Norton, the Emperor of the United States and Mexico.
Okay, I guess I completely missed that. You're gonna have to explain that one to me.
Yeah, many people don't know America has an emperor, or at least did. In the 1880s, he declared himself, or I guess he died in 1881. So in the 60s and 70s, he declared himself and made proclamations and passed laws and abolished Congress and fired Abraham Lincoln and had correspondences with the Queen of England and a variety of other people. Printed his own money and they accepted it in San Francisco.
I don't know. I think I like this guy.
Yeah, Emperor Joshua Norton first, who happened to be born on this day, the 14th of February. And as a result, looking around him, he saw that Valentine's Day made everyone miserable. People that didn't have a significant other were lonely. People that did have a significant other were paranoid. Nobody enjoyed this holiday. And so he abolished it, replacing it with his own birthday, Flux, to be celebrated with the giving of gifts to random people at random intervals.
Oh, okay. Well, you learn something new every day. I've definitely got a new wrinkle on my brain. That happens quite often when we talk to each other, Davi. But,
So that's what I'm doing today.
Well, yeah, I guess everybody's doing that today because we had a hell of a time trying to put together guests for tonight's show. Everybody was busy either drowning their sorrows at the bottom of a glass or, busy enjoying
Well, they're traitors to
themselves,
the
one or
empire.
So yeah, it's definitely a crazy night. I've had a crazy week. I almost got fired on Friday. I'm still not sure if that's happened yet.
Why don't you tell people what you do?
Well, I work in a restaurant, and I guess evidently I upset a welfare parasite, a baby killing welfare parasite. I mean a military veteran. They came into the store and they ordered a Long Island iced tea, and I checked his ID and then I set it back on the table. And evidently that's a massively offensive thing to do because they went home and then called the corporate office of the business that I work at and complained. And it's such.
Is he upset that you didn't thank him for his service? Is that what just happened?
Well, no. To him, because the protocol is that, if someone above you hands you something, you hand it directly back to them. And since I didn't hand the ID directly back to them, I didn't follow proper protocol, which offended him.
Whose protocols?
Well, military protocol.
Well, you're not in the military.
Yeah, but well, evidently that doesn't matter. There'll actually be a
Wait, so you're telling me the
memo.
random civilian, the waiter in a restaurant, is required to learn military protocols so as not to upset our dainty soldiers?
Well, we are now at the business that I work at that shall remain nameless. There's actually going to be a company-wide memo coming from the president of the company that will be sent out to all locations around the U.S. telling them that if you ever check the ID of a military veteran, you are to hand the ID directly back to them and not set it on the table so as not to offend them. So, like,
Well, do they want us to bow too? Should we curtsy?
well, no, I mean, I'm serious. Like, I'm sitting at home today. I didn't work today. I didn't work Sunday. I mean, on Friday, I probably am not going to work tomorrow. I'll know like Wednesday.
So you seriously might lose your job over this?
Yeah. He called. He didn't just talk to my boss. Like, my boss walked through my section while they were there. He took, the guy had an issue with his food, like the steak on his sandwich was too tough, so he sent the sandwich back. So my boss had an opportunity to interact with him. He never once said anything to my boss about that I had offended him the moment he sat down, and left, went back to the hotel, and called the corporate office of my business and complained directly to like the top of the food chain, to the point where like my district manager got a phone call from the vice president of the company telling them to come and speak to me personally, and that like there was this new memo coming out because of the fact that this was so offensive.
It's a thought crime. You commit a thought crime, Will.
Well,
You have to go in for re-education.
according to him, the reason why it wasn't mentioned to me or to my boss that I offended them was that me at 5'6", 155 pounds, was intimidating to him at 6'1", roughly, 185, 190 pounds. I mean, the guy had guns.
Yeah, dainty soldiers. It's just like dainty cops. Everything scares them.
I mean, the guy had guns. I mean, I don't mean like firearms. I mean, the guy looked like somebody had cut his arm open and stuffed two softballs where his bicep should be. He was not a small man that a person of my size should be intimidating to in any way, shape, or form. But somehow. My putting his ID back on the table and, saying, all right, cool, whatever, I'll be right back with that, not a problem at all, was offensive and intimidating to him by me. I mean, it's just, I can't believe it. Like, my bosses can't believe it. Nobody can believe it. I mean, everybody is just kind of slack-jawed about the fact that I'm sitting at home not making money because
where'd the decision come from? If no one at work thinks this,
he called.
What does that mean?
Like, okay,
like CEO? What?
Yeah,
about? Like talking about like a Wendy's size chain, or are we talking like a mom and pop burger place?
No. We're talking like a national, like a national corporate chain that has
corporate food,
hundreds of at least 150 or more franchises around the country that are run by different smaller companies that own franchises, like VolQ and stuff like that. They own like 10 of this particular business, and not just the small company that owns some of those, but the corporate office that is over those people is who was called. Like, they went online and found like the 800 number to the highest person could get to, and to, like, there was no calling my boss or my boss's boss. They went to like the man who owns the business, that like the guy who's over the franchise.
Weird.
Yeah, all over the fact that I offended him. Like, I'm just upset because me here, as a person who works, who my job is service, but I do contribute something to society in the fact that I offer services that are asked for to my customers. Whereas, I mean, this guy's a welfare parasite. He lives off of money that is stolen from the public in order to go murder children across the world to hopefully pay for his college because he was too dumb to get a scholarship. I mean, that's...
Well, I mean, like, I don't want to make assumptions about all corporate food chains, but I'm willing to bet that everyone at the top of whatever one you work for may also be some sort of a welfare parasite. So maybe it's just that they speak the same language, and that's why the orders came down.
Yeah, right. Yeah, like, really, like, all of my direct supervisors were just like, I can't believe that this is even happening. And me, I'm like, are you serious? Like, all I did was put the ID back on the table. That's just a common thing for me to do. Like, I check your ID, I set it down. I check the other guy's ID, I set it down. I go do my job.
You know what's funny about that? It's actually the custom in a lot of Arab countries not to put it back in someone's hand.
Yeah.
Like, I've noticed that people don't touch hands very much at a market. They put money on the table and they put a receipt on the table. And there's like a
Well, yeah, and
It's not
sometimes that
hand-handed.
kind of thing is considered offensive. I think in Indian culture, it's the exact opposite. Like if you don't put it in the hand, it's offensive. But anyway, when we get back, we'll get into some of the stuff I've been looking at. We'll be talking about a Waze app to skirt the religious police in Iran that's been set on the Call to Freedom on LRN.FM. And we're back on the Call to Freedom on LRN.FM. So, when we left, Davi and I were talking about this crazy thing that's going on at my job. And basically, I've been engaged in a hero worship at work and offended a customer of mine. And through that, now and looking at the very real possibility of losing my gainful employment, and there will now be a company-wide memo that will be sent out that will go to all of the different locations of this
Franchises. You're
Yeah,
talking
there
about
you go.
locations.
That's the word I'm looking for. Yeah.
So
some of these things that I've been buying, and the higher your percentage that you select, the longer it might take to get your sale made. But ultimately, it's been very successful for me. I've been doing this for now more than a year. I've had as low as 20% off of things and as much as 50% off at Amazon by using saveatpurse.com. And I have to use Bitcoin. That's the key.
The savings are huge, and it's well worth doing. You had mentioned that sort of with the fees that 50% became 35%. What's 35%?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. I never really did the calculation.
I just wondered whether is there any point in doing 50% if 35% is similar savings?
No, you would. There's a fee on 35% too,
Is
so
it the
you
same
get slightly
percentage or
less than
something?
35%. I don't know, Mark.
Okay.
I've never done those calculations before because ultimately I
The
don't care.
savings are big.
Right. I don't care if it's 30% or 50%. I was going to buy the thing anyway, so I've saved a lot of money. I've saved close to $1,000 now buying various different things over a year through saveatpurse.com.
It's big savings.
Yeah. SaveAtPurse.com. You do need Bitcoin to make it happen, and that is a great reason to get some Bitcoin if you don't yet have that. SaveAtPurse.com. As we go back to the statements between Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump, both of them talking about the special interests that control politics, pandering to the idea that the government is the people. And this is actually important for government people to do, is to remind people that they have a role in this, that it's not just the special interests, it's not just the big money people, it's the little people. We are the government. This is what the statists really want to get out there. And this is a damaging message to people because it's a good thing when the government drives a wedge in between itself and people. It's a good thing when people see the special interests getting benefits. It's a good thing when they see the corruption within the state. Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump are trying to distract people from that. They're trying to get people to believe in the government again, to believe in the idea that if there's just enough people that support these candidates, then things will change. Then all of a sudden this billionaire, for some reason, even though he's friends with a bunch of billionaires, this billionaire is somehow not going to pander to the established special interest just because he says he's not going to. Or the senator who obviously has been, within the halls of power for a long time in Washington, D.C., has somehow been immune to all of the influences of the power and the money up there in Washington, D.C., that they're going to buy this idea and believe that this is still a government of the people, or that it ever was a government of and for the people. This is the danger of this particular viewpoint.
I don't think that's
being
fair.
Expressed.
The same argument you make against Bernie Sanders could have been used against Ron Paul, of whom you were a big supporter. I mean, Sanders was largely untouched. Or more untouched than most.
Ron Paul advocated for liberty. Sanders wants total government control.
I understand that, but they both basically said that, look, I'm untouched by this Washington apparatus, whereas Ron Paul would put in earmarks and then not vote for them. Mm-hmm. He's still operated like a politician because basically he had to in order to do what he did. I'm not saying Sanders is a perfect politician, but your indictments against Sanders and Trump don't resonate with me. What I would say is that well, frankly, when it comes down to Sanders over Clinton, I'll take Sanders. I think he's a superior choice, less of a warmonger. I do believe that there will be a Democratic nominee, and I don't believe that nominee is going to be anyone but Sanders or Clinton. I could be wrong. Weirder things have happened, but at this point,
Bloomberg could jump into the race, apparently.
Yeah, I think he would have to be as an independent. It'd be difficult at this point to bring in a Democratic nominee that wasn't brought in at the convention. So there's some conspiracy theories about Joe Biden being brought in at the convention, brokered convention, all that stuff. But I guess I'm naive enough to believe that we currently have our two choices for Democratic nominee, and it will be one of those two choices. And to me, Sanders is a superior choice between those two. I'm not saying I want him as president.
I'm not advocating for Clinton over Sanders. I mean, let me make that clear. We're just talking about a story reported on by the Daily Wire about how similar Sanders and Trump are. Trump is also similar to Clinton. I mean, Clinton is also an authoritarian. They're just not comparing the two.
You're saying that you don't think that that you think that they're just as corrupt as the rest is basically what you're saying. I should believe that a billionaire that hangs out with other billionaires isn't corrupt, and I should believe a career politician is not corrupt. Well, everybody's corrupt. I think that these two guys, and one of the reasons the populists are for them is because they look less corrupt. I do believe that Donald Trump is willing to give
this is a game,
big fat middle finger to a lot of billionaires.
They're essentially running a scam on people by acting like they're less corrupt or less touched by the influences of money and power, and it's just a lie. It's just politicians lying to people. And in this particular case, this lie gets people to believe in the state. They're using terms like we the people are the government. Ron Paul would never say something like that. Ron Paul's an individualist. He doesn't believe in the idea of the state. That was his clear message. Whereas these two want people to believe in the system. They know that anyone paying attention over the last 8 years knows that Barack Obama didn't bring hope and change. He brought more of the same from George W. Bush. And there are a lot of Democrats who I think figured that out and are disillusioned with the political system. So they have to bring someone like Bernie Sanders in, or Donald Trump on the other side. They have to bring these people in to try to bring people back into the fold.
That's a real conspiracy theory. Bernie Sanders is the Democratic nominee because we have to bring Democrats back in? Please, the Democrats would vote for Hillary Clinton whether Bernie Sanders was out there.
I'm not talking about all the Democrats. I'm talking about the ones who figured out that Barack Obama is not that different from George W. Bush. There are a lot of Democrats who supported Barack Obama in the first campaign and were pretty disillusioned by him by the second time around.
And they're pretty upset with Clinton right now. What do you think is going to happen if she, in all likelihood, wins? She does have the delegate count at this point. I mean,
I don't understand your question. What's going to happen?
Well, do you think that those people that are supporting Sanders right now, who are I'm watching them on Facebook. I keep some touchstones out there just to kind of keep an eye on what people are doing, and I have some Democrats, and they're basically just ripping away at Hillary Clinton in a way that Republicans never could.
So what?
Well, they're not going to turn from Sanders to Clinton when the time comes. Some of them won't.
I don't care if they turn from Sanders to Clinton. I don't understand why you keep making this a choice about Sanders or Clinton, that I'm trying to direct people from one way to another.
You're saying that somehow the political process is being propped up by
that's ultimately
insiders.
What Sanders. I'm not saying there's someone pulling the strings here, but ultimately that's the benefit of Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump. Is they're bringing people into the fold and getting them to believe that they have a say in all of this. And it's all false. It's all a lie. The toll-free number is 855-450-FREE. You don't have a say in Washington if you vote for Donald Trump or Bernie Sanders. It's BS. It's Free Talk Live. 855-450-FREE.
And we're back. So yeah, the Khomeinis, that's the perfect intro to the topic we're considering now with It's this new app. It's similar to Waze. It's been developed by an Iranian, a group of anonymous Iranian app designers and developers, and the idea is to give Iranians the ability to kind of to avoid having to deal with these religious police, the morality police. Now, when they went to the if you go to the webpage for the app's developers, there's a quote there that says, "We do not have to be humiliated for our most obvious right, which is the right to wear what we want." Social media networks and websites full of footage and photos of innocent women who've been beaten up and dragged on the ground by the Ershad police agents. Police need to provide security for the citizens, not turn them into a factor for fear. A while ago, angry with such unreasonable oppressions, we looked for a solution to find a practical way to resist the volume of injustices peacefully with low risk level to restore part of our freedom. So the idea is to restore their own freedom by assisting them in avoiding having to deal with the religious police. And
so how does the app know where the police are? That's what I don't understand.
Well, it works just like Waze. So
it's a witness account thing. You say, I saw a cop on this corner, and enough people saw it that the app follows the cop around.
Something kind of like that. Basically, the app uses data from users to pinpoint where these mobile checkpoints have been placed. So,
they're checkpoints. Oh, okay.
Well, yeah, there's checkpoints, and you have like roaming police officers that, like, the checkpoint shows up 10 people in the van, and they all get out and they scatter around in a specific area. And
in my wildest fantasy, some hacker somewhere hacks the lapel mics that police are starting to get in the United States, or the lapel cams, and by hacking the Bluetooth frequency or however that works, they're able to create a grid of every police officer that's wearing one.
Huh.
That would be amazing.
Says here the new phone app is called Gershad, probably meaning get around Irshad instead of facing them. However, it will alert users to checkpoints and help them to avoid them by choosing a different route. The data for the app is crowdsourced. It relies on users to pinpoint out the location of the Irshad vans on maps, and when a sufficient number of users point out the same point, an alert will show up for other users, and when the numbers decrease, the alert will fade gradually from the map. So basically, like I said, it works exactly like Waze. If you see one of these people, you pull out your little phone and you click on the thing, report religious police, and you push the thing, and it acknowledges that there's one there. And if there's a report and you walk by and it says ding ding, and you look, it's like, oh, there's no religious police around here. No, I don't see I don't see and it works the same way, only it's and
if you really do think your head will explode if you see a pretty lady, you can hang out with the police.
Yeah, exactly. And you can use that app as a way to hang out with the cops, and otherwise you can use that app as a way to, do something smart, which would be to avoid them at any and all costs. And if it's happening here in Iran, I don't see it being very long until this app's available in Saudi Arabia.
I want that app here. I want an app that tells me where all the cops are so I can avoid them.
Well, we have one. It's called Waze. That's what Waze is.
I know, but I don't do a lot of driving. I mean, around town. I mean,
yeah. Waze works the same way. You can put it on to get to point A to point B. There's a walking directions part of the app, and it shows you. You can report where you see police. I'm sure in the same manner. It uses the same GPS, to pinpoint where you are.
I clearly have to try this thing.
I learned about it at PorkFest. Surprisingly enough, I learned about a phone app that helps you avoid the police at PorkFest of all places. Right, about 2 maybe 3 years ago, and we use it now anytime that we're taking a long trip, because it helps you. When there's car accidents, when traffic's moving quick or slow, and when there are police and speed traps sitting up ahead of you. The only place it's not really useful is in Virginia, because they have drones that they use to enforce the traffic and speed laws there. But everywhere else, Waze works really well. I like it. I've found that I've seen some stories where the police kind of complain about it because it's useful in keeping people from getting tickets.
It interferes with their revenue generation. That's the problem.
Yeah, exactly. It creates a form of a competition for them, so to speak. So, but yeah, I think this is awesome. You know, I mean, you hear about all these things popping. I mean, this isn't, you know, this is just one story of many that you and I have had the opportunity, you know, to become privy to, where, you know, you see people in these areas that they're creating ways to be free. You know, the state's putting up a wall. They're finding a way around it. And they don't really get a whole lot of press. You know, I saw this from BBC, but I haven't seen it covered anywhere in American mainstream media. I'm actually kind of surprised to see
they don't want to give us any ideas.
Right. Right. So I would compare this to the Bitcoin and digital literacy campaign in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
You know, absolutely. You know, just another opportunity that where you have people that are, you know, in an area that most people look at it and they don't see new ideas for freedom, this being a place where that would come from. But I think that's exactly where you should look. You should look where there is no freedom to find these new things, because they're the ones who are put in the position that they have to come up with new ideas. You know, here we have air conditioning and we have CNN and Britney Spears and it's all real comfortable. And, you know, we don't have, you know, guys in robes walking around measuring hemlines anymore. We used to, you know, 50 years ago, we had people walking around measuring hemlines in the streets. But we don't have that anymore. So we aren't put in a position where we're forced to come up with creative ideas for ways to get around that type of oppression. And these people are.
Those guys really were religious police. I remember seeing those old black and white photos of guys like going out and like measuring women in their bathing suits. Yeah. And I was thinking, like, if this is really about like not titillating people, why is this guy doing this thing? Like, but yeah, that guy was a religious cop.
Yeah. Morality police, basically.
Right.
Is exactly what that was. But we don't really like to talk about the fact that America had morality police at one point in time. We just...
Oh, they still do. The FCC. The FCC is morality police.
Absolutely, because we can't... Like, we want to be FCC ready. So...
there are things that we can't say on FCC-regulated airwaves because they are religiously offensive.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's why those words are chosen.
Yeah, exactly.
Curses.
I wish I had a beep button so I could sit here and list them all off and just like hit the beep over and over again, but I don't have one of those yet, so we'll have to wait to go through the list of all the horrible words. But yeah,
I have this contraption. I wonder if I can turn this into a beep.
I don't.
Do you know about here? Watch this. This is a recording. I have a little box. It's a sound box from a teddy bear. If you go to Build-A-Bear and you rip the box out, you can re-record stuff.
You are so easily amused, Davi. Wow. So yeah, if anybody was wondering, I still 2 weeks later am still attempting to get rid of a chest cold that I caught from one of my kids that they brought home from school. My voice is probably a little deeper than you guys are used to. I just can't seem to shake this chest congestion, but hopefully a few more treatments of the eucalyptus and mint oil in my bath, and I'll have all of the wonderful glue out and be able to talk to you guys for a full episode without having to cough into your ears because I can't reach the cough button fast enough. So when we come back, we're going to talk some more about this idea of how being put in a position by an oppressive state to come up with new ideas, new ways to fight back, new ways to stand up for your freedom in the face of tyranny, here on the Call to Freedom on LRN.FM. And we're back. Call to Freedom, LRN.FM.
Bum, ba, bum. How's it going?
I am, I'm about to be fired because I'm not a hero worshiper. How do you think I'm doing? Oh, good Lord. I'm just beyond with that whole thing.
It would be a termination worth making hay over. I mean, like, I bet you could get people to. If you got fired for not giving a soldier his ID in his hand and instead putting it on the table, I imagine there'd be people upset enough to protest. Maybe we could start some sort of like Chick-fil-A style, cultural capitalism day or something.
Yeah, right. Well, I'm sure we could get the people like the people with the troops welfare whores and all those guys, James McDuffie and all those guys. I'm sure we could get them on board. I actually tried to get him to come on the air tonight. I sent him a Facebook message, I think, trying to see if he wanted to come on and talk about this stupid nonsense that we're dealing with right now. But it's Valentine's Day, so everybody.
Scale flux. Valentine's Day was abolished in 1879. I'm sorry. I'm going to be a stickler about this. I'm a loyal citizen of the empire, and I abide by the decrees of His Highness. So, the current emperor is in occultation, though. He knows that it's not a safe place for emperors at the moment.
I thought the current emperor was Mark. I thought he took over.
No. That's a different empire.
Oh, okay.
What is Mark's title? He's emperor of all he surveys, right?
Yeah. I think so. Like Galactic Empire of all that his eye sees, or something like that.
No, I suppose the legacy of Norton hasn't reached very far past San Francisco. I know that there's a group in Colma because that's where he's buried. But there is currently an emperor, and he is currently in occultation, and he claims to be emperor of all of America and Mexico. But little known pieces of history. It's probably at the time that there was not a whole lot of communication between West Coast and East Coast, so there could be many little thriving startup emperors in the United States.
Well, I know here where I live at, we had our own attempt that they tried to set up what they called the Nickajack State, which was like an attempt by locals that went from just south of here to, not too far north of here up into like Virginia and Kentucky, where they attempted to secede from the Confederacy and the Union both and set up their own independent state because basically the area was such a mountainous region that the farms there weren't really big enough accommodate for slavery. There was barely enough room to scratch out enough for the people who lived on the land to eat and survive. So it was economically an impoverished area compared to, like, say, Nashville, which is on the other side of the Cumberland Plateau, flat farmland, lots of slaves, first area to secede from the Union at all. Like they were big and definitely wanted to secede. And this area of our state didn't want to. And so since they decided they didn't want to, they immediately were invaded and placed under occupation by the Confederacy and remained under occupation by the Confederacy until the Union came in. And when the Union came in, the Confederates literally just like threw up their rifles and ran away 2 days before the Union got here. And then when the Union came in, the Union immediately put everything under occupation. So like the area that I live in, the area that my ancestors are from, we were under military occupation by either the South or the North during the entirety of the Civil War because of the fact that we chose to be an independent state and did not want to be involved in the war at all.
What's with these people whose entire organization is founded on secession telling other people they can't secede? I don't get it. Like, do they not get how much of a contradiction that is? And it takes like less than a generation.
Yeah. And well, not only that, you have those little tiny movements like that all over the U.S. too. I mean, you have like the Conch Republic. You have there's another one over in I think
I would let them all
Missouri. Yeah, you have all.
I've been saying this. I'm not running, but if elected, right. I would let them all go. Every secessionist movement everywhere gets a plot of land.
But since you'll be old enough, you're not old enough this time, but since you will be old enough at next election, you should do the Daryl run, where it's like, look, I'm not running because I have any desire to actually win. I'm just here to troll the hell out of everybody and teach a few people along the way.
I have a very different campaign strategy, Will. My strategy is not to run, but I will serve in any office in all the land in which I am written in enough to win.
Okay.
That's my policy. I won't run. I won't fill out any paperwork. But if there's enough people in like I don't know, wherever, Bumhaven, Nebraska, that write me in. I'll go there and be dog catcher.
Right on. Right on. I feel you.
Hey, 2 people wrote me in for president last year. They tweeted it.
Oh, right on. No, that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. Well, I mean, I'm only supporting Daryl because of the whole, philosophy thing. He's not up there as a candidate because he's trying to win. He's up there because it's all about teaching, and trying to get the message out. And I don't see the other 2 popular candidates as doing that at all. I see Gary Johnson as like
one reservation about that.
I have Gary Johnson's
I would never
Republican light, basically.
Yeah.
And you have Austin Peterson, the libertarian who doesn't acknowledge the non-aggression principle. So I mean,
okay.
Those are your 2 front runners for the nomination for the Libertarian Party are a Republican and a libertarian who doesn't acknowledge the most central precept of libertarianism. So yeah, that's why I support Daryl W. Perry for president, is because he's kind of the only libertarian that's running that I see at this time.
Yeah. I have one reservation about this, and I'd never confront Daryl about this. I'm not like picking on anybody or anything, but this is just me thinking about myself and whether or not I could run a campaign solely for the purpose of taking the podium. And the thing that always occurs to me is that the only reason that anybody's looking at the podium is violence. And so if I take the podium because I get that that's where the audience is, I am in a sense benefiting from the violence of the podium. Does that make sense? Like if there was no force behind vote, nobody would care.
You're the reason you're the reason why the Mercedes just went too far.
What's that?
Said you're the reason why the Mercedes just went too far. Because there's never a point where you end, like you get to one end of the philosophizing and you're like, oh, but wait a second, what about this? I mean, you sound like a Talmudic, you sound like Talmudic argumentation sometimes when I sit and I talk with you. It's like, did Adam and Eve have a belly button? Like,
I don't care whether or not Adam and Eve had a belly button, but I want to know. I've been thinking about this. Is Lilith real? Like, are you familiar with Lilith?
Yes, I'm
Adam's first wife.
Completely familiar with Lilith and the story of Cain and how it relates to vampire mythology. And
no, I'm not talking about vampires, man. Oh. That's not what I'm getting at.
Well, no, I know that it exists in the Jewish traditions. They talk about this other woman, but that's also connected to like that whole like vampirism religion.
Oh, it is now, but so's Cain, and you know, like Cain is a sort of stable or constant part of the mythos. So like, did Adam have a first wife? Is that something worth contemplating? I am enamored with the character of Lilith immensely, and I like the idea that whatever that story means, it really happened that way. But you don't need it, Islamically speaking, because sort of the purpose of it, metaphorically, is to combat the notion that Eve was subordinate, and there is no notion that Eve was subordinate in Islam. So
yeah. Well, no, I think Lilith was to try to show that Eve was somewhat subordinate versus the absolute rebellion of, because there are, oh Lord, this is going to be awful. There are some women who are like that, who have this thing where they feel they need to, like smash the patriarchy kind of idea, and they're just going to push it as far as they can. And I think Lilith was a patriarchal society's attempt to kind of illustrate that woman and be like, but God hates her. See, she was kicked out. She was banished.
But she was right. She was right.
Yeah, but to the leaders of this priestly class in a patriarchal society like that really was top-down patriarchal society, she can't be right. She can't be right. Because
that's why she's always characterized as a demon or whatever.
That smashes their power structure, That's the reason why I prefer that. Like you said, in the creation story of Islam, there is no power structure between Adam and Eve. They're both equal. They're both creations. They're both equal. They both made the same equal mistake. So, well, when we come back, we'll get into some more interesting topics on the Call to Freedom on LRN.FM. We're back Sunday, this great Sunday evening. We are not celebrating Valentine's Day. Davi is a true believer in the new American empire and has decided that here on the Call to
It's
Freedom...
actually the old American empire. It was from the 1800s. The new American empire kind of sucks, to tell you the truth.
Yeah.
But in the old empire, today was known as Keoflux, which is the emperor's birthday. And that's what I do. I celebrate it, which is celebrated by the giving of gifts to insignificant others. Which means after the show, I'm going to hop down to a place called Seven Stars. It's a Star Wars bar, and I'm going to hand gifts to anyone lonely enough to be there by themselves.
Oh, right on. That is kind of cool. I do like that idea. Maybe I'll take some authoritarian sociopathy bookmarks that I've got.
There you go.
Go hand them out at the party pub. That's the cop bar that I unknowingly went
If
to.
you are going to go hand out authoritarian sociopathy stuff at a cop bar, I will give you copies.
Okay, so here's what happened, right? The very first time I got involved with, when I first got involved with Cop Block, so we're talking PorkFest X, back when you had the T-shirt, when you first did the door hangers for them, right? So I bring home...
Was that my first Pork Fest? No, that was probably
your
my
second one. It was my first, your second. And so you told me as we were leaving PorkFest, you were like, I've got a bunch of this like memorabilia and all this printed materials we have nothing to do with. So grab some and take it with you. So I grabbed a whole box of Cop Block door hangers and took them home with me. And we distributed them all over the place. We went to local head shops and we went to local bars and places, and we handed out, like, Journalistic Revolution had this little speech on a card that like had the name of the radio show and everything and a website on one side, and then like a speech that you read to the cop basically telling them, don't ask me or my passenger any questions, screw you, I plead the fifth. And we went, and I told my mom, and I was like, hey Ma, you know where all the bars are, because she works for a local taxi service. I'm like, you know where all the bars are and everything, take me around to all the nightclubs and stuff, because I don't go out to bars and stuff anymore. I worked in nightclubs for like 6 years, and I didn't like going to nightclubs when I was working in nightclubs unless I was at work. So it's just never really been my thing. So we go out and we hit a couple of spots, and then my mom's like, you know what, it's karaoke night at the party pub, we should go to the party pub. I was like, all right, cool, let's go. Is it a really popular place? Yeah, it's great. Everybody goes there. So we get there, and unbeknownst to me, it's actually owned by a local sheriff's department officer, and it's completely staffed by members of the local sheriff's department. The bartender is married to the guy who runs the karaoke is a cop. Like, basically, it's the cop bar. And I'm in there, and I'm handing out Cop Block flyers and door hangers to everybody that's at the bar, and I'm getting these dirty looks from all over the place, and I don't understand why. And I walk up to the lady behind the bar, and I'm like, hey, here's some stuff, I work, we're here, we've got some guys that work locally, and if you see a guy here and he's wearing like a Cop Block t-shirt, he's not here to cause trouble, he's probably not even drinking, he's just here in case something goes down. And the lady looks me right in the face, and she's like, honey, I think you're in the wrong place. And I was like, what? Well, yeah, you see that man right up there, the one behind the karaoke machine? Yeah, honey, he works for Blount County Sheriff's Department, and my husband, he owns this place. He's a sergeant for the... I'm like, oh, Mom, why did you bring me here? Mom, this is the cop bar. She goes, yeah, I know. It's a great place for you to hand that stuff out, isn't it? I wanted to come sing karaoke.
She's not wrong.
Well, yeah, but she's like, I brought you here to hand out Cop Block literature at the police department's bar because I wanted to sing some karaoke, and I thought it'd be funny to watch you squirm like a worm on the end of a hook. So, yeah, maybe we could go to the party pub and hand out some bookmarkers. It's not like I haven't already been in there and not gotten arrested once.
Well, there you go. I'm going to be giving out books, actually. I've been sort of paring down my book collection.
Yeah.
So I put together about 15 of them, and I wrapped them.
So
and
you've got all those Al-Ghazali books, right? That you've been trying to get rid of.
No, those shipped out.
Oh, awesome. Well, there was actually a discussion. There's a video that's going around. I've seen a lot of people share it. It's Neil deGrasse Tyson, and he's talking about the. Well, he doesn't mention Ibn Rushd's side of the argument, but basically the argument of like rationalism versus traditionalism with Al-Ghazali and Ibn Rushd, and how. Again, he doesn't attribute it to this, but I do. How basically the post-Crusade culture had created this like desire for like an authoritarian traditionalism, where like the Westerners had this authoritarian state with a standing army, and we didn't, and that's why they won. And they enforce and keep their traditions through the force of arms and burn people at the stake for not doing, not falling in line with the religion and the culture, and we don't. So that must be why they won and we lost. So they this was happening in the culture already, and that Al-Ghazali and Ibn Rushd's argument kind of happened in the cultural context of all of that, and that through that, Ibn Rushd's ideas of rationalism were kind of swept aside by the state itself, and through that by average everyday Muslims, because that's the state, the top-down control of the state was affecting the way that their religion was evolving at this time.
I wonder if that's why they thrived in the West, because this is a common motif in like all of history that when a state declares an unpopular war, and listen up, dainty soldiers, it's an unpopular war, so don't expect us to thank you for your service all the time. But when a culture is forced to engage in an unpopular war, they adopt the philosophies of the enemy. And this is why Buddhism has a resurgence when you go to war with Japan, and communism has a resurgence when you go to war with Russia, and Islam has a resurgence when you go to war with the entire Middle East.
Yeah.
I wonder if this is the medieval period's version of that if Christendom is going to war with Islam or going to war with Jerusalem or whatever, the Crusades are going on, and it's unpopular, it's dictated by these clergymen, it's not like the people want it, they don't care. As a result, they're like, oh, Ibn Rushd has these cool ideas about like a smaller government.
Yeah, and that the basis of all decisions should be reason and not traditionalism. Yeah. Well,
I skipped some steps there. He wasn't actually talking smaller government, but his philosophy catalyzes those notions to some extent. And it meshes with the ones that are in the West too, because libertarianism itself is a repressed idea in times of war. So
well, now my train of thought was, and I actually got quite a lot of pushback from Muslims on this, is that basically that the loss of that argument between Al-Ghazali and Ibn Rushd kind of paved the way, so to speak, for these authoritarian ideas to continue to evolve in the Muslim world from that point forward. So without the loss of Ibn Rushd's ideas on rationalism to Al-Ghazali's ideas on traditionalism, you have no Ibn Taymiyyah. And without Ibn Taymiyyah, you have no Ibn Abdul Wahhab. And without an Ibn Abdul Wahhab, you have no rise of the Wahhabi and the Salafiyya movements, no rise of the Al-Sads, no rise of modern violent extremism. Basically, the central catalyst for this, and it's unpopular because Al-Ghazali was brilliant. I mean, he did have amazingly brilliant writings, and yes, he was very sincere. But this point where Muslims gave up the tradition of rationalism that was strongly rooted in the religion in favor of superstition and traditionalism, that was kind of the turning point in society. And if you look at Muslim society academically, that was the end of the golden age. And philosophically, you only have like two more major well-known Muslim philosophers that came after that point too, with the exception of the new rise in extremism. Well, coming back on the other side, we'll be talking about the rise of extremism, Ibn Rushd, Al-Ghazali, and many other subjects on LRN.FM's The Call to Freedom. And we're back. So yeah, this whole thing with the argument in at the end of the Islamic Golden Age about traditionalism versus rationalism, and you had two great, well-known scholars facing off on either side. On one side, you have Ibn Rushd, who later became known as Averroes in the Western world. And then on the other side, you have Al-Ghazali, who in his own right was a brilliant legal and religious scholar.
And his stuff's more widely available. Like his stuff was given to me as a convert.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a lot easier to get your hands on Al-Ghazali than it is really anything. I mean, it's as easily accessible as Bukhari, as the Sahih traditions of Bukhari or Sahih Muslim. It's that easy to get your hands on. Usul al-fiqh,
although you definitely do get people declaring him a heretic and whatever.
Well, yeah, you get that you get that with Al-Ghazali as well.
You get that with everybody. I'm talking about Ghazali. Yeah, there's pretty much nothing you can say in the Muslim community that won't get you decried as a heretic by somebody.
Yeah.
So,
and I think that's another thing that it's kind of important to point out to our listeners. You guys really should be amping for LRN.FM because we're working on getting a new satellite signal that will help us cover the Middle East. And, that's kind of part of the whole purpose of this show is to be a voice of liberty from a Muslim perspective to the Muslim world. We're covering with one of our satellite signals right now an area that is home to about 270 million Muslims. And we're discussing issues of liberty from a Muslim perspective, trying to get that message out to them. And as the commercial said right before we got back on, the satellite signals are free to listen to, but they unfortunately are not free for us to provide. And the newest satellite signal that they're looking at will cover pretty much all the Middle East up to I was looking at the map. It's about 20 miles outside of the border of Yemen is where the satellite signal will cut off. So we would cover all of Saudi Arabia, just about, including Mecca, as well as Pakistan, Qatar, the whole Gulf region, with the exception of, like I said, Oman and Yemen. So
that's crazy. What a weird time to be alive that you can broadcast over the radio. Well, I mean, from like my little office here on international waters into Saudi Arabia, into Mecca, where like when I was a kid and I lived in Saudi Arabia, if you wanted any media like television, magazines, anything, it had to go through the Department of Enjoining Good and Forbidding Evil, and if they didn't like it, it came back to you black. Like, yeah.
That's in the satellite signals we have. That's a way to circumvent that whole thing, And
what a huge. That's going to change the culture. The fact that they're like even in communication with the outside world is going to change the culture.
Yeah, and I kind of see us as independent, as kind of a following the example of the Radio Free Europe. That we saw in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s, where they were piping like the Beach Boys and the Beatles across the Iron Curtain. Instead, we are broadcasting libertarian philosophy from an Islamic perspective.
Radio Huria.
Radio Huria, exactly, Radio Huria. And I think like when we finally get a proper intro put together, I'd like that to be like the echoing thing at the very end of it, Radio Huria, because that's what we are. We are radio freedom for the Middle East and the Muslim world. We are the voice of liberty from the perspective of that society and that religion to that area in order to bring these ideas back, because they, in a lot of cases, they originated there, with Ibn Rushd or with other scholars like Al-Qaddafi, who discussed these ideas about the natural rights of man. Ibn Tufayl. And had massive influence on the scholars that in the West that eventually created the Renaissance and the Enlightenment. So if it weren't for those Muslim thinkers, then we wouldn't have had this flourishing. And what happened, what I see happening, is that the Western world took on Ibn Rushd's ideas. Ibn Rushd was required reading in the first universities in the West. His commentary on the works of Aristotle was required reading in the new universities that were being created in the West post-Crusade. And his ideas were shelved in the Muslim world in favor of authoritarian traditionalism. And you saw what happened. The Muslim world favored authoritarian traditionalism, and their society stopped flourishing. You stopped having these golden ages. Happen?
Because I know, like, Ghazali he was a court scholar, right?
Yeah.
Like, he was working for the emir or whatever, and then he has this like crisis of conscience, and he's stricken with mute. He's stricken mute, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he has to leave his government office, and he goes and he wanders the world, and he becomes this sort of Sufi. But all of the sort of religious revivalism happens after he leaves government.
Yeah.
So why did it still happen?
Well, because you have to look at there were other things going on in the culture. Like I said before, there was, this is post-Crusade. This is after the Muslim society, the Muslim world has been vanquished, so to speak. Prior to that, you had tribal anarchists, anarcho-tribalist societies all across the Middle East and North Africa. Patricia Crone writes about them in her book, 9th Century Muslim Anarchists. And what happens is you have, an influx of 30,000 armed militant pilgrims and soldiers in a standing army come into an area that does not have that type of a functioning centralized state. And when that happens, they don't have any ability to really defend themselves in any meaningful way because, it's 30,000 armed pilgrims. Really, what are you going to do? And because of that, it's just like what happened with Japan. After they were vanquished, they took on some of the characteristics of the vanquishing party. And what the characteristics that they took on was the worship of a centralized monopoly on violence. We started turning those violent figures in our own societies into heroes, just like happened in the Western world. And the Western world took our ideas home with them and began to flourish. And we kept their ideas here and slowly but surely have devolved backwards since that point.
That's weird. It's like war is like one giant cultural exchange.
Well, yeah, particularly the Crusades. I mean, if there were no Crusades, I don't believe there ever would have been a Renaissance. There ever would have been an Enlightenment, because the Crusades is what brought that knowledge back to the West. If they hadn't invaded and gotten their hands on those books and taken home truckloads of books along with the truckloads of wealth that they took home, there never would have been a Renaissance or a Crusade. Well, more interesting historical facts and more when we get back on The Call to Freedom on LRN.FM. Okay, we're back. So, we've been talking about basically the point in Islamic society where everything's shifted. There was a point where the philosophical position of Islam changed. Things.
You know what Rose Wilder Lane calls this period in Islam and the History, or Islam and the Discovery of Freedom by Rose Wilder Lane? She says that the fundamental difference in philosophy that occurred in Muslim society that changed it from a golden age to a dark age was that they stopped believing in God and they started believing in government.
Yeah, exactly. They stopped worshiping Allah and started worshiping the state, al-dawla. And that's a quote I use all the time because, it's true. And I even use it with Muslims. And Muslims get really upset when you say that to them because, well, there's a huge piece of truth in the midst of that statement. And that, I guess you could say, brings me into the next story that I wanted to cover about these income tax hikes that are coming according to Bernie's new tax plan. Now, I've made it abundantly clear over and over again, and so far, every scholar that we've interviewed on the show has acknowledged the simple fact that the income tax is not seen as something that's permissible in Islam. It's seen as oppression. It's theft. You are stealing someone's income before they have access to it. You are holding them hostage and extorting them through the threat of violence for a portion of their income before they ever even see it, before they even have the ability to take care of their own personal needs. And somehow...
Yeah, like what if you're only able to earn as much as you need and you're not earning a surplus? They're still going to take it.
Exactly. And that's the problem that is central in the income tax, particularly from an Islamic jurisprudential perspective. And that somehow has translated into massive amount of support for Bernie Sanders among the American Muslim community. And I'm looking at the graph here on the Foundation for Economic Education, and they're talking about the difference in the tax rates for people. And I don't know about you, but if my income is from $0 to $18,000, I do not have the ability to give up 34.1% of my income every year to the state. Whether I get it back in a one lump sum once a year or not. I mean, currently, according to the current numbers, between income tax and payroll taxes, a person who's making between $0 and $18,500 is paying 25.3% of their income to the government, and that's not including taxes for gasoline, taxes for utilities, taxes for sales taxes in states that have sales taxes, taxes on
those are all taxes you pay after you pay taxes.
Exactly. Those are that's on top of the taxes you pay on a regular basis just to live and function in society. 25.3% of a person's income taken before they ever see it. And it gets worse the more money you make. When you get all the way up to $250,000, they're talking about taking 62% of a person's income before they ever even see it. And that's really problematic for me because, as Sheikh Hamza Yusuf said,
what's called income tax in classical Islam is definitely prohibited.
I lose you, Will? Where'd you go?
So, I mean, it's pretty simple. The income tax is prohibited. It's not something that is permissible according to Islam. It's something that we've basically decided to embrace in the name of being a part of modern Western liberal society, that we have to give this up. And the excuse I'm always given is, we don't live in a Muslim country, so we don't have to support justice. When I always thought that
you live in a country where people are free to stand up for justice.
Exactly. If you live in a country where you're free to stand up for justice and you see that something is an absolute injustice, the proper position for any moral person, whether you're Muslim or you're not Muslim, is to not go out of your way to support the injustice, to not go out of your way to try to validate the use of violence against your neighbors in order to pay for your mushy feels and good intentions. It's just beyond pale to me.
I don't know. I think at some point, it doesn't offend people's conscience. And I don't know why that is, because it offends mine. So,
well, and again,
and that's innate. I feel like it should just automatically offend a person. The concept should offend them when they first hear it, and I don't know why it doesn't.
Well, again, I'll go back to Hamza Yusuf again. I've got another quote lined up from him right here, and it just shows you the massive change in the society since the defeat of rationalism by traditionalism.
Muslims are very wary of any scholar
You're gonna have to draw that
who
line. How do we get from supporting the income tax to?
And they always.
How do we get from here to there to here? What does the income tax have to do with traditionalism? Is my question.
Well, it's that again, the embrace of authoritarianism. That was the basically, my argument is that when the split between rationalism and traditionalism happened, the authoritarianism came along with that because it became this idea that you needed traditionalism and it had to be enforced by the state, or it had to be enforced by culture through intimidation in some way. And that when that happened, that's what opened the door for these later interpretations that are so top heavy, that are so they're popish. They're popish.
Okay.
You know, the after the Crusades, after dealing with that type of a thing, we embraced popishness. We embraced that idea. When it was an anathema to our society before, it was something that the governments may have practiced, but the societies themselves rejected. That's why Imam Malik was tortured. That's why Ibn Hanbal was tortured. That's why Al-Qaddafi was tortured. It was because even though many times the government embraced this papacy type idea, the scholarly portion, the academics within the religious discourse rejected it to the point that they were willing to rail against the state's use of it, even in the face of being kidnapped, tortured, and possibly murdered. And that we've given up on that. We now will advocate in favor of all of these things to avoid being kidnapped, tortured, or murdered.
Well, people got a right to avoid being kidnapped, tortured, and murdered. But
well, yeah, I acknowledge that you have a right to avoid that, but we don't live here in America. We don't particularly live in a society where if you stand up and say the income tax is oppressive, that someone's going to come and try to slit your throat in your sleep or throw you in a cage. I mean, if you don't pay it, yes.
Yeah.
But again, that's something you're doing under duress. You know, you're not paying it because you want to. Muslims shouldn't be running around going, woohoo, I pay my taxes. I'm proud of the fact that, you know, I gave up my yearly stipend with a gun to my head.
Well, neither should patriots, but they sure do. Like they bark about how they pay their taxes and they act like that somehow either is an argument for or against something.
What
or
I think
that
is
it
funny, though, is those are the same people that bark and growl at the fact that taxes exist in the first place, and they say and they claim they don't like taxes.
I pay my taxes.
Yeah, but in the same breath, they'll
it's a point of pride.
it's some point of pride that you gave up, you know, your yearly extortion fee, your protection money, basically. At least with the Muslims, when there was a protection racket that existed, it was a voluntary racket where you couldn't be violently coerced to buy into it. You had the option of opting out. At least according to the Hadith traditions, under Omar ibn al-Khattab, you had the option of opting out of the protection racket. You didn't have to buy in. All right, well, on the other side, coming back, we'll be right back on the Call to Freedom on LRN.FM. We are back. The final segment here on the Call to Freedom on LRN.FM. Me here in my private little secret Liberty bunker in the Smoky Mountains of East Tennessee, along with my amazing co-host, broadcasting from international waters, Mr. Davi.
Yep. I cannot disclose whether I am on a ship or a submarine, but I can affirm that I'm in international waters.
So yeah, back to this whole discussion. When we talked to Imam Zaid the other day, I asked him straight up about the state in Islam, and he basically quoted Bastiat. You know, he said that any individual, any individual has no right to give the ability to commit an act that they themselves don't have the right to commit to another individual or group of individuals. So if I want charity to exist, I should give charity, but I don't have the right to to send Davi to my neighbor's house to threaten him with violence in order to take his money so that I can pay for that charity. Because I myself don't have a right to go to my neighbor's house and take that money out of his pocket myself. And that if anyone does so, whether they be an individual or an actioner of the state, that they are accountable for that action as a crime, the same as anyone else. So, I mean, if that's the simple basis of Sharia, then how on earth can Muslims all over this country advocate for literally the mirror opposite of that? And not only advocate for it, but be proud of themselves, pat themselves on the back, and encourage each other to do so.
But this is like the constant apologetics that I hear when people ask about rules they don't like, is people say, well, individuals don't do that, governments do that. like what? You know what I mean? Like, I can't think of a great example, but this is sort of are you familiar with this apologetic that people will say that, like, let's say punishment for alcohol, right?
Yeah.
They'll say, oh, well, yes, this is a rule, but there's no government right now. And so only a government can do that. And they act like this was, I mean, I realize this is crazy and off topic and not.
There's no such thing on this show, you know that.
It's not a legit rule anyway, but this is what Imam Awlaki said about the cartoons, was that because there was no Islamic government, it was the obligation, or at least the duty, of every Muslim to kill Muhammad cartoonists.
Yeah, but every major scholar that I've ever heard has actually argued the opposite, that because of the fact that there is no agreed upon emir for the community, there's no
compact.
Yeah, there is no
That's
compact. There is no contract. There is no bay'ah. None of that stuff exists today. So because none of that stuff exists, there is no legitimate doorway, no legitimate calls for military force or anything like that. That you can't even feign legitimacy for the efforts of these individuals or these small groups to call for these types of actions, because of the fact that they are not following the rules as far as gaining the support of the community at large. They're just declaring themselves to have these leadership positions, and basically just saying, okay, well, if you're a part of the community, you have no choice but to follow me. But whether you follow me or not is immaterial. I've decided that you are my subject. In Islam, there is no implied social contract like that. You individually have to make that contract with a leader if one exists. I can't make it on behalf of my family. A tribal leader can't make it on behalf of his tribe. It has to be done on an individual basis.
You must be able to accept it, though. Like, could somebody make bay'ah to you, Will? Like, if the government can't have rights that individuals don't have, and the government has this sort of right of people making pledges to it, that means individuals can make pledges to each other, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
so you could just start building a community built on bay'ah just by accepting it.
Yeah, exactly.
But what do you owe thing to is the question.
Well, I guess that would have to be something that was set up between the one taking it and the one giving it. I think that's why the whole idea of like the leader who doesn't want the position,
Yeah.
Like I like that idea. Like if there is a person who is in a position of power, I'd prefer it was someone who didn't seek that position out. That it was someone who, like a group of people saw them as so morally upright and trustworthy that they would ask them to take that position, not because they sought it out, but just simply because we are in a position where we need some kind of leadership, or we feel that we do, as a community, whatever community it may be, a small voluntarist collective even. We feel we need some kind of a leader to speak on our behalf, and we have chosen you. You didn't have a campaign and try to convince us that you were the best person. We came to this decision on our own without any effort from you.
I feel like the existence of the position as a permanent sort of social infrastructure sort of necessitates it happens the other way around. You know what I mean? Like, if the position exists and the position is going to exist whether the people want it or not, like it's permanent as an office, then people will gravitate to it who want it. Whereas if it's a non-permanent social role, right? Like, you don't always have to have a standing judge, but you might ask someone to settle a dispute for you, right?
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that you have to elect one every 4 years.
Well, I mean, that's how the whole thing operated after the collapse of the Umayyads from that point until the Crusades. That's basically how the society functioned, was they didn't have a need for a central leader to give bay'ah to, so they just didn't. It was like, okay, we got rid of the Umayyads. They were like this horrible cancerous empire, and what we've decided is that once we got rid of that cancer, we would just replace it with nothing.
Yeah, we don't have any need they were fulfilling, so we got rid of them, and now we fulfill whatever needs we actually have.
Well, basically, they got rid of. I mean, historically, they got rid of themselves. You know, they grew and taxed the empire to the point of its own collapse, and then it just collapsed into its own footprint. And the small societies that were left after that massive leadership collapsed in on itself decided, hey, we got rid of this large, centralized, repressive monopoly on violence. Maybe we should just not replace it with another one. And it stayed that way until after the Crusades.
Well, there you go.
You know, sadly, the Crusades, you know, as one of the people in the chat room mentioned, kind of created the argument against voluntarism, you know, basically that because of the fact that the Europeans had this centralized top-down state, they were able to come in and destroy a flourishing voluntarist society because it didn't have a standing army. So there you go.
But there would be an army.
But there
like
wasn't.
That's the thing. That's the thing that gets me. Like, as soon as your land is invaded, you can raise an army. Like, as soon as you're in a legit act of aggression and you're legitimately defending your homeland, it's the easiest thing in the world to raise an army because everybody is in a fighting stance.
It was too little, too late, historically speaking, though, because before the Muslims could put something together to defend themselves in a manner that was actually somewhat successful, it was too late. The European, like I said, 30,000 militant pilgrims along with, you know, a standing army of tens of thousands of soldiers just show up ready to sack your society. It's kind of hard to mobilize a military force to go against that when it literally, like, hello, it's Tuesday, and Thursday they're sitting in your front lap.
Sure.
You know, and that was what was perceived by the Muslim society as the problem. So they got rid of these free societies in favor of these top-down state-type societies, and now that society, there's not been a golden age in Muslim society since then.
So how do you legitimately defend against a standing army? I mean, that's the question. That's going to be the question the world over here pretty soon.
It's a good question. How do we? How if a free society was set up somewhere in Europe, how would they defend against the United States military? How do you stand up against something like that? If a free society was created here in the U.S., how do you stand up to the might of the U.S. military? All right, well, that's it for the Call to Freedom this week. We had a great conversation. No guests this week. Everybody was out enjoying their girlfriends or enjoying drinks. I am Will Coley.